In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.
Samantha Mehlinger is the editor of the Long Beach Business Journal, a publication that has existed for well over 30 years, reporting on the business community, primarily in the greater Long Beach area. Today on our program, Ms. Mehlinger and I will be discussing and analyzing the local and regional economic climate. Welcome to our program, Samantha.
Thank you
We're
for
so
having
happy
me.
to have you here, taking time out of your busy schedule as being an editor of this fine publication. Why is by all indications, Samantha, the economy is doing very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, we've had very slow and sustained growth for about 10 years now, since the end of the recession. And we're actually approaching the longest period of economic growth that this country has ever seen. The reason for that is that following the recession, the federal government kind of put a tight lid on lending restrictions. They poured some money into the economy by buying bonds, quantitative easing, they call it. They kept interest rates, they slashed interest rates and then kept them low. And individuals and businesses were reticent to make risky investments, and they were also kind of prevented from that due to some of those restrictions. And what you saw as a result is slow growth in gross domestic product and in consumer spending over the past 10 years. But recently, we've obviously seen a spurt.
Well, we've seen a spurt because of the tax cut.
Correct.
That the Trump administration has championed, but it was really the Congress under Paul Ryan who initiated it and passed it.
Correct.
Should they get the kudos for this economy taking the spike up from the slow growth?
Sure. Well, I don't know if I have the authority to give anybody the kudos for economic growth, but certainly,
They
Congress
played a role.
passed it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly. But since they did, the first quarter was a little slow still, and you really saw the impact come around in the second quarter where GDP doubled compared to the first quarter, and that's because people had more money in their pockets and they were seeing the benefits of wage gains.
Well, it's not a slam dunk that when you do a tax cut, that the business community is going to reinvest through it with paying people more money, wages, as well as hiring people. New people. But in fact, we're seeing the beginnings of that in this tax cut, are we not?
We definitely are. After the tax cuts, you had some massive corporations. I couldn't even list them all because they were in the dozens, really, come out and say, we're hiring X many people, we're investing in these workforce development programs, we're going to increase these benefits. Boeing was one. Obviously, that has a local impact. And locally, I mean, the economy has been growing anyway, but I've spoken with businesses. We recently did a focus on Douglas Park, and most of the companies located there that I interviewed, and I probably interviewed around 20, said that they were growing and they were hiring.
What types of, and these are manufacturing, not heavy manufacturing businesses, but manufacturing businesses nonetheless, because we were saying nationally manufacturing is over because it was been shipped across the seas. But what types of manufacturing companies are we seeing at Douglas Park?
Sure. It's interesting you make that observation. I've had conversations with folks at the city and their workforce development department about sort of the future of manufacturing and how it's changing. You're not seeing the same large-scale manufacturing like you did with McDonnell Douglas back in the day, but you are seeing some smaller scale manufacturing.
For instance?
Still significant. Virgin Orbit over at Douglas Park, they're manufacturing satellite launchers. So if you go toward their facility, you'll see them literally building rockets. That's one. You have a printer toner supplier over there. You have Rubbercraft, who manufactures polymer products.
Who was instrumental in getting these manufacturing companies to come at Douglas Park?
Well, actually the real estate community. I would say, because that was a huge undeveloped parcel of land,
Yes.
and there's very little industrial property available in the South Bay and near the ports, for example. So that was really the only opportunity when that got built out to move into a larger facility or to build something to scale to handle that. So a lot of companies moved that needed to grow from like Gardena and Carson to snatch up some of those industrial properties.
Also, we're seeing a lot of construction going on in the city of Long Beach. It's characterized this city more than I've ever seen. I've been in the city a long time. We're seeing a lot of construction that's going on, particularly in the downtown area.
Yes.
Why is that, and who's benefiting from that? What type of construction are we seeing?
Well, you're seeing a lot of investment on the part of real estate developers. When I speak with economists, they tell me Long Beach has been kind of overlooked as a place to invest for many years, kind of I hate it when people say this, but the stepchild to Los Angeles.
I've heard that many times.
Yes. But real estate developers are now realizing that it's a more affordable opportunity, it's a growing city, it's the only downtown on the waterfront between San Diego and San Francisco. There's growing businesses here, so you're seeing, and there's a great need for housing, so you're seeing as parcels become available, they're just getting snapped up, mostly by apartment developers.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned about housing. The median cost of housing in Southern California is like $600,000.
That's right.
And despite the fact that there's a lot of housing development going on, there's still a shortage in housing right now. What's going to be done about that?
Well, that's a complicated question. When you speak with economists, for example, or builders, or the real estate community, what's really holding back development, because we're actually underbuilding. We are seeing a surge in development because the economy is doing well, but it could be doing better. I think we're supposed to be building to meet demand something like 100,000 units per year, and we're only building 80 statewide, and that's because of environmental regulations, such as the California Environmental Quality Act, kind of need to be revisited. It causes developers to have to jump kind of through too many loopholes. There's too many opportunities for developments to be nixed. In some cases, obviously, there's good reason for that, but in some cases, these processes get dragged out so long that the developers no longer have any money left to really put into it.
And so in that case, that's when the executive should come in and say, okay, we got potential businesses coming into the city or in this county. Can we cut some of these regulations? And then, of course, on the other side, they say, well, these regulations are needed. So it gets bogged down. And in that case, what would the mayor of a city do in that case?
Mayor Garcia has been very pro-development, smart development in the downtown and along like the metro corridor. So he's sort of championed housing. It's not as much of an issue in Long Beach, I think, because everybody recognizes that we have a need for affordable housing, but you do see it in places. My brother lives in the Bay Area, and a lot of housing projects there get nixed because the neighborhoods don't want them. They don't want more people coming in there. We don't have that attitude in Long Beach, but it is a problem.
Well, you mentioned Oakland and San Francisco. San Francisco was dragging in terms of economic growth for a while, and then we see, at least the reports that I've been getting, is Oakland and San Francisco are on the upsurge, just like Long Beach. And those are port cities. Does it have anything to do with, and we'll talk about trade in a second, but does it have anything to do with those cities being port cities as well?
You know, I wouldn't be able to tell you that one.
Okay. Now, I'd like for us to turn to the tariffs. The tariff policies of the administration. The Trump administration, and some even not so many some business people say that we've been getting the short end of the deal in terms of trade deals. And that's why the Trump administration is saying we want a fair share. We've been losing, and we look at recently at NAFTA. But these tariffs that are being tried to be administered by the Trump administration, what type of effect would that have on our local Long Beach economy?
It depends upon the tariffs, but specifically we need to be looking at what's going on with China. which obviously is the source of kind of the back and forth with the tariffs, the trade war
wars.
discussion.
Yes.
About 80%, I think, of cargo coming through the San Pedro Bay ports, coming in and going out, is sourced from China or going to China. So if the tariffs keep escalating, right now I think it's 25% tariffs on 60 billion worth of goods, something like that, I believe. If they keep escalating, that will cause trade to be restricted, because the tariff is essentially a tax or a fee, and you're artificially inflating the price of those goods to ship them overseas.
There's a reaction to that.
There's
if
a
I put a
reaction.
tariff on you, then you're going to put a tariff on me.
Right, and eventually that discourages the movement of goods, because it's too expensive to ship them, and those costs will get passed on to the consumer. And then the argument in favor would be, well, that might stimulate some domestic production. However, when we're talking about the Long Beach economy, a major sector for us is trade and logistics and warehousing in terms of employment. And if trade were to slow down through the ports, those jobs would be affected.
What type of jobs?
We're talking about rail workers, longshoremen, dock workers, truck drivers, warehouse workers.
It's like a domino effect there.
Customs brokering, I mean, even law to a degree, and at the very end of it, retail. So yes, it could cause some problems.
And looking in the article that you recently said, the San Pedro Harbor would probably be the most affected, at least from a local standpoint.
Absolutely.
Why so? Because they have those types of businesses?
Because that's a major sector of employment. The San Pedro Bay ports are the largest port complex in the United States.
Really?
Yes, they handle 40% about of the share of maritime trade coming into this country, and most of it through these ports is coming from or going to China. So if tariffs continue to escalate with China, it's only it's sort of an obvious conclusion to draw that if that trade is restricted, all of the ancillary industries that support those massive ports could be affected negatively.
So when we look at that situation and we look at what needs to be done, obviously it has the business community, at least that industry, nervous about what's going on. Mm-hmm. What then traditionally would be done to kind of try to circumvent that?
The tariffs?
Yeah, we're talking about this China, United States pull and tug in terms of threatening, the Trump administration threatening tariffs. At that point, we have two opposing viewpoints. How can that be resolved?
I don't know. I mean, we're kind of in uncharted territory, and obviously we're dealing with an administration whose policies are not as predictable as prior administrations, and it has kind of been par for the course that free trade is the accepted, mode of things for the past few presidencies. So this is kind of uncharted territory in recent times, so I'm not quite sure. Obviously, the administration is trying to intimidate China so that we can get some gains in trade, and it just depends on how long that process drags out, what the impacts will be.
Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the performance of the mayor of this city in terms of the policies that he is at least championing, if not instituting, and who in a city like Long Beach, what entity in a city like Long Beach are significant players in terms of the economy being boosted. Now we got a national situation, but in a city like Long Beach, you have city council members, you got the mayor, you got some of the business organizations. We want to find out what roles they play in terms of the economy being boosted right after we take a short break.
Okay.
We're visiting with Samantha Mehlinger, who is the editor of the Long Beach Business Journal, and we're going to talk about the mayor, this office of the mayor and the city council in terms of this economic growth that we're experiencing here in Long Beach. We'll be right back after these messages.
In a democracy, citizens need to be informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.
We're visiting with Samantha Mehlinger, who's the editor of the Long Beach Business Journal, and we were talking about tariffs, and we were talking about the economy, and we were talking about possible trade wars. But I'd like to turn our attention right now, Samantha, to the offices of mayor and in a local economy. And we see a lot of construction that's going on. We see a lot of good things going on. And then if I see some good things going on, I say, who's responsible for these good things? Now, the city of Long Beach, which is the local government, is totally responsible for things. How much credit does a mayor get, or either Mayor Garcia gets, Mayor
Garcia.
Garcia gets, in terms of the boost in the local economy?
Mm-hmm. I think it's only natural that people typically give credit to whoever is in power at the time that the economy is doing well. You can compare it to past presidents. President Obama came in when the economy crashed, but was that his fault? President Trump is overseeing a period of growth. Is that entirely because of President Trump? And you can kind of say a similar thing when it comes to mayoral leadership. Mayor Garcia has been pro-business in some ways. He has reestablished the economic development department of the city. That was one of the first things he did when he became mayor.
Now that's wise to appoint someone who in a position, like we're talking about the economy, someone who knows the economy, somebody that's respected and can give good advice. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're saying that the mayor did.
Yes, he reestablished the economic development department, and John Keisler is in charge of it. He's somebody who's been with the city a long time and is kind of an ideas guy. And he's done a really good job in putting forward some programs and policies to help businesses, and particularly entrepreneurs start up. He's trying to take another look at business licensing to make that process less onerous. He helped lead an effort to create an online portal that takes businesses all the way through, like startup to opening, even in terms of not just stuff you're dealing with the city, but how to get funding. We have a small business ombudsman now. There's all kinds of things.
One of the big things that small businesses, or even large businesses, but mainly small businesses, one of the biggest griefs they have is that it's too much regulation. They have to jump over too many hoops, and it costs them money. Mm-hmm. What has Mr. Kaiser did to kind of alleviate that?
Well, I think business licensing, him taking a look at that, if something comes to fruition with that, I know it's kind of a process that would really help businesses if that process were easier. He's made the department, just by virtue of having the department and having more people on staff, I think they're more accessible now. Mm-hmm. You also have, for instance, one of our council members, Janine Pierce. She has proposed cutting conditional use permit costs for entertainment. That's something that could really help business. So that's something that's coming up. We could see that would really be helpful in terms of cutting red tape.
What role does the city council play in terms of this economic growth? We talked about the mayor, we talked about the city government in terms of Mr. Kaiser and the economic development contingent, but what role does this city council play? When somebody is elected city council, people generally, the electorate really just say, well, sometimes they do say that he's a good business person. But looking at this council comprehensively, what role has this council played in the last couple of years in terms of this economic growth?
Mm-hmm. Well, the city council sets policy, they create ordinances which can guide, they can create business restrictions, or they can help them in some ways.
Who's been taking the lead in that on the city council?
Well, it depends which side we're talking about. So in terms of creating restrictions, you have the environmental side. Mm-hmm. You have proposals that have been put forth about banning styrofoam. That one passed, although a lot of the businesses are on board with that because they see the negative impact it has on our local harbor, but it is an additional cost. The council was also pushing an increase in minimum wage, which ended up being a non-issue because the state passed its own policy.
Okay.
But that process was kind of difficult for the business community as the council was going through it. There was a policy being proposed that's now going to the ballot because it didn't pass the council to regulate hotel work hours and to provide
It was kind of
workers
controversial
with
there too.
panic buttons.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's reasons for that. But so those are some examples of, it's kind of a mixed bag actually from the city council.
Now we look at, when we talk about environmental restrictions, we look at the west side of Long Beach, which has the rail system going on the west side of Long Beach, and there's always been a big fight in terms of the trucking industry and the railroads. Is that a big conflict in terms of a city council person saying, "Whoa," because we got polluted air coming from the port? And then some council people who are maybe pro-business saying, let's ease up on the restrictions. Is that a clash?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. There is a project that's caused a lot of that kind of debate recently that's coming up for the Port of Long Beach. It's the expansion of Pier B's on-dock rail.
That's right.
Yes. The West Side businesses that are there, I went over and sat down with a bunch of them. They were very unhappy because many of them, it's going to either butt up right against their business. And we're talking about companies that are dealing with like Disneyland and Starbucks, and that's going to negatively impact them. Some that would actually be wiped out by the rail lines. If you look at the environmental impact report, there are concerns in terms of impacts to health, but the port argues that overall rail will reduce truck trips, which will overall reduce emissions and reduce health impacts. But I'm not necessarily the expert in that, but that's the debate that's happening. It did pass. The council member for that district, Lena Gonzalez, did, I know, meet with the businesses, and I know that she does have concerns, but it did pass. So it is moving forward, and we'll see how that process unwinds.
Well, I want to talk about a journalistic question here. You are editor of the Business Journal. What role does the Business Journal play in this economy here? What are you guys trying to do in terms of your business publication, and so that means you're pro-business. But what kind of role does a newspaper like yours play in a city like ours? Role that you're actually trying to play?
Well, I think it says on the cover of our paper, we want to be the voice of business. We want to know what businesses are going through, whether that's dealing with city government, dealing with the state government. We want to know what's helping them be successful. We want to know if they're growing, but we also want to know if they're facing some difficulties. And part of that is also engaging with the city government, county government, state government. We have some proposals coming up on the ballot that could really impact businesses. There's a parcel tax proposed for the county that's meant to create funds for stormwater abatement, which could really help our harbor on the one hand. On the other hand, it's going to add a tax for like all impenetrable concrete. So basically any industrial business is going to be affected pretty significantly by that tax. So those are some of the things that we kind of try to keep an eye on in advance of them happening so that the business community is aware and we get their feedback.
That's very, very, very important. How did you get in this business? You're the editor of Long Beach Business Journal. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this.
My background is actually in creative writing. I have a BFA in fiction writing.
BFA, what's that?
A bachelor's in fine arts.
Okay.
And I have a master's in fine arts from Long Beach State. When I was at Chapman University, I took a theater abroad course, and my professor kind of took me under his wing, and he knew I was good at writing, and he said, why don't you write about something you love? So he got me in with a theater publication in LA, and I continued writing for them all the way through graduate school and decided to give the journalism thing a try. And I saw a position open at the Business Journal a little bit after I graduated, and I'd applied to a lot of places. The economy was still pretty rough in Long Beach at that time. And I figured, well, I don't know much about business, but I love Long Beach at the time. Now I know much more about business.
Obviously,
yes. And I applied, and they gave me a shot, and I sort of hit the ground running, actually as staff writer.
Give us a sneak preview of what might be coming up in the Business Journal that your readers might be interested in that you see on the horizon.
Okay, I can give you our next edition, for example. We've got our annual interview with Mayor Robert Garcia.
Okay.
Our focus on corporate presence, where we talk to a lot of the major corporations that have operations in town about how they're doing, or this time we're actually asking them what they want to see in the future workforce. So if they were to talk to high school students, what would they tell them to pursue?
That's good.
We're going to be talking about the parcel tax I mentioned.
Parcel tax, tell us about that.
It's the one that has to do with stormwater funding, and that's going to really hit some real estate and owners
what
of
part of town?
businesses. Everybody who owns any real estate will be affected by that
How so?
parcel tax. Well, I'm not an expert on the tax, but assuming that you have any kind of spot on your property where water could run off into the gutter, you're going to be hit with the tax, and that's supposed to fund stormwater abatement. So if chemicals are running off your property, the county can fund ways to counteract that.
So you've been editor for how long now?
Since January. I became assistant editor last year and was promoted to editor this year.
I want to ask you a question about Mayor Garcia. Since you have been with the newspaper, and you guys sit down with him annually,
Yes.
what can you see from this mayor that has shown some maturity and growth that we should be cognizant of? At some point, you can see him in perspective in terms of what he's doing with this city. What difference have you seen in the last 2 or 3 years with him? Maybe in some growth area as the mayor.
Ooh, that's a tough question because he came in with a lot of experience already on the city council.
Yes.
And I think he's been pretty smart about the way that he's approached his job as mayor. He knows that it's the city council's job really to set the policy. I think he obviously guides that to a degree where he can, but he kind of stays out on the major quabbles, some of the major debates until the end. So I don't know quite how I would answer that question. He's always engaged with the community. I think maybe he's engaged more so with the business community over the years. But
And he's been a proponent of education as well. And we're talking
that
about
was his
business.
big thing from day one,
Yes.
because he's an educator.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we've enjoyed talking with you, Samantha, and I've known about your newspaper or Georgia Economies as a publisher for many, many years, and most people feel like the newspaper is very fair. There's some very challenging things coming up in this city, and the voice of a business journal, a business newspaper, has a vital role to play. And we thank you for coming on the television program, Conversations with Erroll Parker, to talk about this.
Thank you for having me.
We just visited with Samantha Mehlinger, and she's the editor of the Long Beach Business Journal, which is plays a very important role in not only in our economy, but informing the business community of what's coming on the horizon. We thank you for coming on the program, and we'll be back next week with an exciting guest on Conversations with Erroll Parker. Please join us. Good night.
In a democracy, citizens need to be informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.